What if I told you that the same castle has been spotted on battlefields across 8 centuries, witnessed by soldiers who had never met, never spoken, yet described identical details of a fortress that shouldn't exist? Tonight, we dive into one of history's most disturbing military mysteries, a tale that connects the blood-soaked fields of Agincourt to the trenches of Verdun and beyond. The first recorded sighting comes from a French scribe named Brother Antoine, writing in 1214. He documented the testimonies of surviving knights from the Battle of Bouvines, men who spoke of a massive stone fortress that materialized through the battlefield smoke. They described walls black as charcoal, towers that seemed to scrape the very clouds, and something else, something that made these battle-hardened warriors weep like children. They spoke of figures moving along the battlements, figures that weren't quite human, watching the carnage below with what one knight described as hungry anticipation. Brother Antoine initially dismissed these accounts as the ravings of men driven mad by war's brutality. But then came Agincourt 101 years later. English longbowmen, French cavalry, thousands dead in the mud, and that rising through the morning mist, the same impossible castle. Henry V's own chroniclers recorded testimonies from dozens of soldiers, English and French alike, all describing identical features: the same black stone, the same twisted spires, the same watchers on the walls. But here's where it gets truly unsettling. The soldiers didn't just see the castle, they heard it. A sound like grinding stone, like massive gears turning deep within the earth. And underneath that mechanical groaning, something that chilled them more than the October cold: the sound of weeping. Thousands of voices, crying in languages they couldn't understand. Languages that seemed to predate human speech itself. The castle appeared again during the 30 Years' War, witnessed by Swedish and Catholic forces at the Battle of Lud in 1632. Protestant and Catholic soldiers, enemies in life, would later give identical accounts while dying in field hospitals. They spoke of the fortress emerging from cannon smoke, its walls seeming to absorb the screams of the dying, growing darker, more solid, more real with each life lost. By now, you might think this is some shared delusion, some psychological phenomenon, born from the trauma of battle, but the testimonies are too consistent, too detailed, and they come from men who lived centuries apart, who spoke different languages, who had no contact with previous accounts. How do you explain Swedish mercenaries in 1632 describing the exact same architectural details as English bowmen from 1415? The pattern continued through history's bloodiest conflicts: Napoleonic Wars, the American Civil War, the Franco-Prussian War. Always the same description, always appearing in the thick of the most savage fighting, always accompanied by that terrible sound of ancient weeping. But it was during World War I that we got our most detailed accounts, and our most disturbing revelation. Verdun, 1916. 300 days of hell, 700,000 casualties, the longest battle in human history. French and German soldiers, pinned down in trenches barely 50 yards apart, both reported seeing the fortress rise from no man's land. But this time, something different happened. This time, some soldiers claimed they saw the castle's gates open. A French corporal named Marcel Dubois, writing to his sister just days before his death, described seeing figures emerge from the fortress. Tall, gaunt shapes that moved among the corpses littering the battlefield. He wrote that these beings seemed to be collecting something, bending over each body, touching the wounds, the broken flesh, as if harvesting some invisible essence. Dubois claimed he watched through his periscope as one of these creatures knelt beside a dying German soldier. And for a moment, just a moment, the soldier's anguished screams stopped, replaced by that same ancient weeping they all heard from. Within the castle walls, the most chilling account comes from a German sniper named Klaus Steiner. Steiner was known for his steady nerves and accurate observations, essential qualities for his deadly profession. But his final letter home, found clutched in his frozen hand 3 days after the battle ended, tells a different story. Steiner wrote that he had aimed his rifle at one of the figures moving near the castle, something he described as wearing robes the color of dried blood. When he pulled the trigger, the the creature turned and looked directly at him across 800 yards of cratered wasteland. Steiner claimed it smiled, revealing not teeth, but rows of tiny doors, each one opening to reveal the face of a soldier who had died at Verdun, and they were all screaming his name. Steiner was found dead in his sniper's nest, rifle still in his hands, no wounds on his body, but his face frozen in an expression of such terror that the soldiers who found him initially refused to touch the corpse. But World War II brought new horrors and new sightings. Stalingrad, 1942, the bloodiest urban battle in history. Soviet and German forces, trapped in a frozen city, fighting for every building, every room, every staircase. Both sides reported the castle, appearing through the smoke and snow, but now it seemed different, larger, more detailed. Russian snipers described seeing windows in the towers, windows filled with faces, the faces of every soldier who had ever died in war. Watching the slaughter with empty, hollow eyes, a German officer named Captain Friedrich Brandt kept a detailed diary throughout the siege. His final entry, dated February 2, 1943, the day Stalingrad fell, describes something that defies all logic. Brandt wrote that, as the last German positions were overrun, as his men lay dying in the rubble, the castle began to move. Not disappear, not fade away, but physically relocate. Its massive bulk shifting through the destroyed city like a ship through water, always positioning itself where the fighting was fiercest, where the most blood was being spilled. But the most disturbing modern account comes from Vietnam, 1968, during the Tet Offensive. American and Viet Cong forces engaged in brutal urban warfare, and there, rising through the jungle canopy and napalm smoke, the same impossible fortress, but this time, American helicopter pilots got something no previous generation of witnesses had: aerial photographs. The photos, classified for 30 years and only recently declassified through Freedom of Information requests, show something that shouldn't exist. The castle appears in 17 different photographs, taken by 7 different aircraft over a period of 6 hours. But here's what makes these images truly unsettling. In each successive photo, the castle appears to be under construction, its walls growing higher, its towers extending further into the sky, as if it was literally feeding off the violence below, using the death and suffering to build itself into something more substantial, more real. The final photograph in the series shows something that no military analyst has been able to explain. The castle stands complete, its black walls now clearly defined, and along the battlements, tiny figures can be seen, thousands of them, watching the battle below. When the image is enhanced, those figures resolve into the faces of soldiers, American and Vietnamese, soldiers who wouldn't die until hours after the photograph was taken. Yet there they stand, already watching their own deaths from the walls of an impossible castle. So what is this fortress that appears wherever men wage war? Some researchers believe it represents a kind of psychic imprint, a manifestation of humanity's collective trauma, growing stronger with each conflict, each act of violence. Others theorize it's something far older, something that existed before human civilization, something that feeds on war, on death, on the specific kind of suffering that only organized warfare can provide. But perhaps the most terrifying theory comes from a small group of military historians who have spent decades collecting these accounts. They believe the castle isn't just observing these battles, it's orchestrating them. They point to the pattern, how conflicts seem to intensify whenever the fortress appears, how tactical decisions that should have ended wars quickly instead prolonged them, maximizing casualties, maximizing the harvest of human suffering. Consider this. Every battle where the castle appeared resulted in casualties far beyond what military strategists predicted. Agincourt should have been a minor skirmish, but became a slaughter. Verdun should have lasted weeks, not 10 months. Stalingrad should have fallen quickly to German efficiency, but instead became a meat grinder that consumed entire armies. What if these weren't tactical failures? What if they were by design? The researchers point to a disturbing pattern in the testimonies. Soldiers often describe feeling compelled to make decisions that put them in greater danger, orders that made no strategic sense, charges that were obviously suicidal. One Civil War veteran wrote that during the Battle of Antietam, he felt pulled toward enemy lines, as if something was calling to him from beyond the battlefield. He described it as a whisper in his mind, promising rest, promising an end to the horror, if he would just walk a little further into the killing field. Recent conflicts have yielded new sightings: the Gulf War, Somalia, Bosnia, Iraq, Afghanistan. Always the same castle, always appearing where the fighting is most intense, and always accompanied by reports of soldiers making inexplicably poor decisions, of commanders issuing orders that seemed to come from someone else's voice. A Marine sergeant from the Second Battle of Fallujah, speaking anonymously, described seeing the fortress rise from the smoke of burning buildings. He claimed that as he watched, he heard his own voice giving orders to his squad, orders he never intended to give, orders that sent good men into an obvious kill zone. He described feeling like a passenger in his own body, watching helplessly, as his mouth spoke words that weren't his, words that would get 3 of his Marines killed. The most recent confirmed sighting comes from Syria, 2015. Kurdish fighters engaging ISIS forces reported seeing the Black Fortress appear during the siege of Kobani. But this time, for the first time in recorded history, someone tried to approach the castle. A Kurdish sniper named Rojan Khalil, whose entire family had been killed by ISIS fighters, left her position and walked across no man's land toward the fortress. Ignoring the bullets flying around her, ignoring her comrades' shouts to return, Khalil's approach was captured on drone footage by American forces monitoring the battle. The video, leaked online before being quickly removed, shows Khalil walking steadily toward the castle as it rises from the urban destruction. As she gets closer, the fortress seems to become more solid, more real, until she's standing directly before what appears to be a massive gate set into black stone walls. The most disturbing part of the footage comes next. The gate opens, not with the grinding of ancient hinges, but with the sound of 1,000 voices screaming in agony. Khalil stands motionless for several minutes, apparently listening to something inaudible to the cameras, then turns and walks back toward her lines. But the woman who returns isn't the same person who left. Her fellow fighters described her as moving differently, speaking differently, her eyes reflecting a knowledge of things no living person should know. Khalil fought with supernatural skill for the remainder of the battle, her rifle never missing, always knowing exactly where enemy fighters would appear, always positioning her squad to inflict maximum casualties while taking minimal losses. But her comrades noted something else. She began to weep constantly, tears streaming down her face, even while she fought, even while she ate, even while she slept. When asked about it, she would only say that she could hear them, all of them, and they were so very tired of waiting. 3 months later, Rojan Khalil walked into a minefield outside Kobani. Her body was never recovered, but witnesses reported that just before the explosion, just before she stepped on the device that would kill her, they heard her laughing, the first time she had shown any emotion other than that constant, inexplicable weeping. So, here we are, 8 centuries of consistent testimonies. Thousands of witnesses across dozens of conflicts, all describing the same impossible fortress, a castle that appears wherever humans engage in organized slaughter, a structure that seems to grow stronger with each life lost, each act of violence committed in the name of nations, ideologies, or gods. The question isn't whether this castle exists. The evidence is too consistent, too detailed, too widespread to dismiss. The question is what it wants, what it's building toward with each appearance, each harvest of human suffering. Some believe it's constructing something, using the essence of violent death as raw material for a purpose we can't comprehend. Others think it's simply feeding, growing stronger, waiting for the right moment to fully manifest in our reality. But there's a third possibility, one that keeps military historians awake at night. What if the castle has already achieved its goal? What if, after 8 centuries of appearing at humanity's bloodiest moments, it's finally complete? What if all those faces on the battlements, all those harvested souls, weren't just observing our wars, but learning from them, preparing for something far worse than any conflict in human history? Consider the state of our world today. Nations armed with weapons that could end civilization, conflicts spreading across continents, humanity seemingly incapable of learning from its own bloody history. What if this isn't human nature? What if it's influence? What if something that has spent 800 years studying human warfare, learning our weaknesses, understanding our capacity for organized violence, is now ready to orchestrate the final battle, the war to end all wars, not through peace, but through the complete consumption of our species? The castle hasn't been seen in recent conflicts. No sightings in Syria after 2015, nothing from Ukraine, nothing from the latest Middle Eastern violence. Military researchers have two theories for this absence. Either the entity behind the fortress has learned everything it needs to know about human warfare, or it's preparing for something so significant that it no longer needs to observe. It's ready to participate. Sleep well tonight, knowing that somewhere in the space between reality and nightmare, a black castle stands complete, its walls built from 8 centuries of human suffering, its towers reaching toward stars that may not be stars at all, but the eyes of something vast and patient, something that has watched us kill each other with increasing efficiency for 800 years, and something that may finally be ready to show us what real warfare looks like. The next time you hear about a conflict somewhere in the world, remember the testimonies of soldiers across centuries. Remember the faces on the battlements, and ask yourself, are we fighting our own wars? Or are we simply providing the final lessons in a curriculum of violence that began in 1214, and may be nearing graduation? Because if the castle appears again, if those black walls rise through the smoke of our next great war, it won't be there to observe or to harvest. It will be there to graduate, and we will finally understand what it means to face an enemy that has spent 8 centuries learning everything there is to know about how humans die in battle, and is finally ready to put that education to use.